Megan Dawson was sitting in the kitchen humming softly as she cradled her 6-year-old daughter, Sally, in her arms. The young mother furtively glanced at her watch from time to time, waiting for her husband to get home from work. The most interesting thing was that, unlike most women, Megan wasn't exactly excited to see her husband, and had a very good reason for it. But in order to understand them, we need to go back in time a little bit and find out how their relationship started. Megan moved to New York 3 years ago and almost immediately found a job. School teachers are always in demand, regardless of the location. Teachers are needed in tiny towns just as much as in big cities. Megan's parents died in a car accident, so she was raised by her grandmother on a small farm from the age of 5. It was Rosemary Dawson who insisted that her granddaughter try her fortune in a big city like New York. Students and teachers immediately fell in love with the cheerful, slender young woman, whose eyes shone with kindness and sincerity. Megan got along well with all kinds of students, even those who were considered bad kids and were treated like outsiders by everyone else. Many people believed that the young woman from Ohio would have a wonderful career in the big city, but then fate intervened, making drastic adjustments to the life of the young teacher. It all started when she met a man named George Lewis. George had wealthy parents, so he could afford to court Megan and buy her expensive gifts, which helped him charm the young woman. The couple dated for about 3 months, after which their relationship moved into the phase of incredible passion and love. Despite the fact that George's parents were against him dating a woman from a poor family, their relationship was clearly headed towards marriage. "Son, why do you want to live your life with a boring teacher? What can she give you? A pile of notebooks and a complete lack of proper attention? Your father and I have already found a worthy partner for you, the daughter of the landowner Miller. I think that's a great option," Charlotte Lewis said. At that point, his mother's opinion didn't have that much of an effect on George, since he was used to always doing things his own way. Deep down, the man wasn't actually excited about getting married because he knew that his feelings for Megan could cool off at any moment. It had happened to George before, and the only way out of that situation was to break up. It's hard to say how long they would have put off getting married if Megan hadn't found out that she was pregnant. There could be no mistake because the woman didn't trust the test and immediately wanted to see the gynecologist, who dispelled all the remaining doubts. The news of Megan's pregnancy had an effect of a cold shower on George. It instantly sobered up his head, heated with passion. Now, like any decent person, the man had to marry Megan, and he understood it like no one else. The wedding was rushed and planned without much enthusiasm, which was mainly because of the extremely hostile attitude of George's parents towards his fiancée. Of course, Megan felt their disapproval, but she tried to keep it together, hoping that over time things would get better. The young woman felt very bad throughout the entire pregnancy, but she tried not to show it so as to not upset her husband, in whose house she lived all this time. At first, George showed sincere concern and even went to the store to buy all kinds of exotic treats for his wife. But eventually, the light of passion in the man's eyes went out, and he started treating Megan with coolness that was hard not to notice. "It's okay, we'll have the baby and things will go back to normal," the woman reassured herself. Continuing to believe her husband, Megan didn't even suspect how wrong she was and how insincere his feelings were. The epiphany came a little later when baby Sally was born. Exhausted after the difficult birth, Megan was looking forward to the moment when her husband would come visit them and pick up his newborn baby for the first time. Unfortunately, George didn't seem all that excited about having a daughter, and even more so, he expressed doubts about his paternity. "She really doesn't look like me. It's all very strange. I had mumps as a child, and the doctors said that I was unlikely to be able to have children." Megan's cheeks flushed. She didn't expect to hear such words from her husband, who was her first and only man. "You don't believe me? Why would you even? The baby doesn't have to look like you. Genetics is a complex thing, and children can inherit the traits of their relatives." Megan objected with concern in her voice. George looked at his wife somewhat strangely and forced a smile, trying to suppress his true emotions. Ever since that day, the relationship between Megan and George was completely ruined. George was starting fights almost every day, while Megan stoically endured it all, trying to shelter Sally from unnecessary stress. That day, as soon as Megan saw her husband on the doorstep, she realized that there was no avoiding yet another fight. As soon as George entered the house, he gave his wife the usual contemptuous look. Now he's going to start telling me that Sally doesn't look like him again. God, what did I do to deserve this? Megan thought to herself. In the meantime, George came closer, took a rolled-up document out of his pocket, and threw it at his wife. What is it? Megan asked in surprise as she picked up the document. But when the woman ran her eyes over it, she felt sick to her stomach. The document turned out to be the report issued by the medical examiner's office, which stated that based on the tests they ran, Sally definitely wasn't George's daughter. It must be fake. Do you believe this report? Who gave it to you? Was it your mother? I'm willing to have DNA tests run at a dozen different clinics to prove I'm right. Sally is your daughter, Megan exclaimed in despair. But there was no stopping George. The man's eyes literally burned with anger, which he was going to take out on his wife and her child. Fortunately, Megan knew her husband all too well, so she knew to expect outbursts of aggression from him. She carefully placed Sally in her bed while she started packing her things. The situation with the fake DNA test hurt her indescribably and stirred up a storm of indignation in her soul. Seeing that his wife was packing, George decided to hurry things along and started throwing her clothes out into the street. Having a hard time holding back her tears, Megan dressed Sally in warm clothes and headed for the door. Go ahead, leave, and don't come back, George shouted and threw his wife's shoes after her. Megan walked aimlessly, knowing full well that there wasn't a single cent in her pocket. Tears were flowing down the woman's face, which didn't bring her the desired relief and couldn't cool down her cheeks, burning from the righteous indignation. To the delight of her mother, little Sally took everything that was happening as just a regular walk and was looking around with a sweet smile on her tiny face. Having realized that she simply had nowhere to go in New York, Megan decided to return to Ohio and settle on the farm with her grandmother, who was very ill by that time. Suddenly, it dawned on the young mother. I have a credit card in my purse. There's not much money on it, so it's unlikely that George would bother blocking it. At that moment, Megan put her hand inside their purse pocket and started searching for the coveted piece of plastic with the magnetic strip. Finally, the woman managed to find the credit card, which was like a lifeline for her. Only after she withdrew the money and bought a ticket to Ohio did Megan manage to relax a little bit. All this time, she was afraid that her husband might decide to follow her, so she kept looking around. The road to her hometown took Megan and Sally several hours. It wasn't until noon of the next day that the young mother found herself at the gates of Rosemary Dawson's farm. The dog Casper immediately started barking, thus notifying the whole neighborhood of someone's arrival. The old woman looked out the window and immediately saw Megan with her baby daughter. Tears welled up in Mrs. Dawson's eyes as she realized that she became a great-grandmother. At the same time, the wise woman was in no hurry to ask her uncomfortable questions, and without further ado, provided her granddaughter with everything she needed. The baby looks so much like your late mother. She has the same eyes, and her nose is slightly turned up, too, Mrs. Dawson noticed, looking at Sally with true love in her eyes. Megan smiled wryly, trying not to think about the DNA test her bastardly mother-in-law had forged. But it wasn't for nothing that Rosemary Dawson had been living for 80 years in this cruel world, so she quickly understood that something was bothering her granddaughter. The wise woman realized that Megan's family life was probably in serious trouble, and she needed some time away from her husband. Sally really liked her new home, which the little one immediately filled with her perky, childish laughter. And Mrs. Dawson was no longer alone and could now count on the help of her beloved granddaughter, who surrounded her with care and attention. 3 months have passed. Megan had already adapted to life on the farm and even partially erased George from her memory. Of course, the woman still couldn't forget all the insults and all the pain the man caused her, but at least she managed to restore her peace of mind. In all the time that Megan had been living on the farm, George never visited his ex-wife. Moreover, he never even called her up to see how she was doing. I guess he doesn't care about Sally and me. Well, it's his choice, the woman thought sadly. But Megan wasn't destined to feel sad for a long time, because something happened in her life that completely changed her situation. It all started on a rainy fall evening when there was a persistent knock on the door of Mrs. Dawson's house. Having opened the door, Megan was surprised to see a man smeared with mud. He looked at the woman guiltily. "Please forgive me for such a late visit, ma'am. My car got stuck in the mud, and as luck would have it, my phone died. Is there any chance I could use your phone to get a tow truck?" the stranger asked in a pleasant, velvety voice. "Yes, of course. Come on in. I'll make you some hot tea in the meantime," Megan answered with a smile. The man coughed in embarrassment and came inside. It took the man about 10 minutes to arrange for the tow truck to come for his car, after which he got changed into clean clothes that used to belong to Megan's late grandfather. As it turned out, the man in trouble was Travis Gray, who worked as a surgeon in one of the best clinics in New York. "And what brought you to our neck of the woods?" Megan asked in surprise. "Oh, I was visiting my father. He's been living all alone ever since my mother died. He wanted to move to New York, but he had some health problems, so I make sure to visit him whenever I get the time," Travis answered, sounding a little embarrassed. Mrs. Dawson smiled meaningfully and invited her guest to the table. Over a cup of tea, the young surgeon briefly spoke about the fact that he had been a widower for 5 years after his wife died in a fire. In turn, Megan shared her sad story with the guest, which interested him very much. "What did you say your husband's name was? George Lewis?" Travis asked cautiously. Megan raised an eyebrow in surprise and immediately asked, "Why do you say was? It is still his name, George Oliver Lewis. Why are you talking about him in the past tense?" The young surgeon got visibly tense and tried to change the topic of the conversation. But Megan already felt that something was off. Having shown miracles of determination, she got a detailed and truthful answer out of Travis. "About 3 months ago, George Lewis got into a car accident. He was extremely drunk, and I was on call that night. Despite the fact that he had virtually no chance of surviving, I wanted to take him into surgery. Unfortunately, Mr. Lewis died before he got onto the operating table," Travis answered in a trembling voice. Only now did Megan realize why her husband never reached out to her in all this time. Apparently, having kicked out Sally and me that ill-fated evening, George got drunk and went to look for more adventures, Megan whispered. In the depths of her soul, she felt sorry for her ex-husband, who believed his mother's lies and destroyed his own life. On the other hand, George made his choice, and blaming anyone else for it would be plain wrong. Having listened to the young surgeon's story, Megan pulled herself together and invited the guests to spend the night in their house, since the weather was simply terrible. She could hardly have imagined that after agreeing to spend the night at Mrs. Dawson's house, Travis Green would stay there for a whole week. The man liked the farm so much that he seriously started thinking about quitting his job and moving to the village. But the truth was that Travis's desire to move was based on his feelings for Megan, whom he liked from the moment he first saw her. Moreover, the man spent a lot of time playing with little Sally, who immediately won his heart. The tormented heart of the widower felt alive again at the mere thought that he might have a new family. Fortunately, Trevor's feelings were reciprocated and got the warmest response from Megan, who realized that she had finally met her soulmate. Since the young mother didn't want to return to New York, Travis didn't argue and transferred to a local clinic. Looking at the beautiful couple, Rosemary Dawson enjoyed her life and believed that she would live to see the birth of her great-grandson, who would become a brother to little Sally. It's hard to say whether the old woman's wish would come true in the near future, or whether she would have to wait a few more years. But one thing was for sure, the family life of Travis and Megan would always be filled with love, tenderness, and mutual respect.